The establishment clearly needs a global reset. International institutions, both financial institutions and geopolitical organizations, clearly needs a reset. Thank you very much for that introduction. Your Excellencies, distinguished guests, I bring you warm greetings on behalf of the people of St. Vincent and the Grenadines, an archipelago of 32 islands nestled in the Caribbean Sea, and not very far from Antigua. My good friend, Honorable Minister of Tourism, just recently provided his synopsis on tourism investment in small states. It is a distinct honor for me to address the Berlin Economic Forum, hosted by the Institute of Cultural Diplomacy. And I want to thank Mag and his team for the excellent hospitality and ensuring that our voices are being heard and shared here within this global space. To share some highlight insights on the ever-changing global political economy and its impact on small island developing states, including St. Vincent and the Grenadines. Despite our small size as a developing state, we are a proud people with a large global footprint in the context of the global political economy. To put into perspective, St. Vincent and the Grenadines is the smallest nation to ever be elected as an permanent member of the UN Security Council. As pro tempore president of the Community of Latin America and the Caribbean, CELAC 2023-2024, St. Vincent and the Grenadines co-chaired the EU CELAC meeting held in Brussels 2 years ago, the first such meetings held in 8 years. We are a part of a sub-regional bloc called the Organization of the Eastern Caribbean States and a member of the Caribbean Community, CARICOM. Our main economic drivers remain tourism, agriculture, and services. And following our recovery from the global health pandemic, we have had to grapple with a volcanic eruption in 2021 and a Category 4 hurricane devastating the southern part of our island in 2024. And despite these challenges, coupled with the knock-on effects of the external shocks, including the Russia-Ukraine conflict, our economy has shown positive and robust growth, and our people remain resilient, optimistic, and conscious of our role in the changing geopolitical landscape. Our country may have found the right formula through a well-developed socio-economic development plan centered on building buffers, strengthening macroeconomic and financial resilience, and supporting sustainable and inclusive initiatives for growth. In 2024, we saw projected growth of 4.9%, above the global average of 3.1%, and across the EU, which stood at 1%. It therefore brings me to the main topic of this year's Economic Forum, and whether collectively the global community is creating the environment for international business, sustainable investments, which in turn advance global development, democracy, and peace. We are assembled here at a time of global uncertainty, amidst the challenges of geopolitical conflicts, a broken and outdated global financial architecture, and the contemporary challenges of an existential kind, particularly those relating to climate change, pandemics, poverty, food insecurity, citizen security, and the unequal distribution of the world's resources. Permit me to provide a contradiction to the theory of the world's economists. Our world does not revolve around the decision makers of the boardrooms of the Fortune 500 companies. Neither does it revolve around the spring meetings of the World Bank and the IMF, or the world's richest 1%. It is simply the collective actions of the world's population, their lives, sustainable livelihoods, heritage and culture, and of course, production that drives the world global political economy. Globalization has turned the world into a global village, yet growing instances of outright political and economic self-interest impacts the global economy. Inequality gaps between the world's rich and the poor threatens our very existence and hampers tangible direct benefits to the majority of the world's population. May I say that mature diplomacy is needed in dealing with the contradictions of the global political economy, and therefore global leaders and decision makers must provide efficacious modalities through an urgent multilateral action to address the challenges facing humanity. Now, as the world population expands, we will require efficacious management of resources from food security, water management, and accelerated transition to renewable energy, thereby reducing the downside risks and escalating pressure on our environment and the world's depleting resources. Failure to adequately adjust our priorities will see global conflicts of epic proportions and resource nationalism becoming the order of the day. There's no one formula to solving the world's major problems, but undoubtedly addressing the issues affecting the world's most vulnerable provides a starting point. Several call to action initiatives, from meaningful debt restructuring, a multi-dimensional vulnerability index to better facilitate development financing, and a reacceleration of the targets towards a 2030 sustainable development agenda, must be areas for urgent attention and priority. If we are to pay close attention to the management model adopted by many SIDS on how they are able to balance prudence with enterprise, managing the impacts of inflation, global supply chain challenges, while at the same time adjusting national legislations to support the legal framework of international law regarding climate change, biodiversity, and environmental protection, human rights, and gender balance. We would see the emergence of a variant modern economic political model within the context of international political economy. Small island developing states and vulnerable regions must also adapt their own domestic strategies to deal with the challenges that are confronting us. And we must lead by example in protecting lives and livelihoods. In my own country, St. Vincent and the Grenadines, my government have adopted a disaster risk financing strategy, and ongoing efforts to implement it include the continued building of a contingencies fund and the establishment of a catastrophe deferred drawdown option written into agreements with international financial institutions, which simply means whenever there is a disaster, which we are prone to as SIDS on the front line. They are debt pauses to many of our loans with external and international financial institutions. The contingencies fund is a fund that is self-sufficient, where most of the resources from that fund are collected from our own tax-paying citizens, who then contribute to disaster recovery and building resilience within our own space in the Caribbean region. Meaningful reforms of outdated global institutions, including the United Nations and its specialized agencies, and the international financial institutions of the World Bank and the International Monetary Fund, where full forensic reforms of global financial architectures would make them fit for purpose to our current contemporary realities. Within SIDS, a large chunk of borrowed funds are intended for loss and damage, recovery, and climate adaptation. Much of our progress has been hampered due to global instability and climatic shocks. Therefore, debt restructuring becomes the order of the day. SIDS are borrowing at an alarming rate to provide basic needs and climate adaptation to protect the world's most vulnerable populations. These high-interest loans and terms which, without negotiated debt clauses, continue to balloon the ledgers of most developing states. It simply makes the case that debt must be viewed differently from what the international financial institutions are packaging to countries as development finance. The embarrassing fact is that most developed countries continue to play lip service to many of their formal and legal commitments at an international level. In fact, we are seeing a growing trend of new terms being negotiated to avoid existing and prior agreements to reduce greenhouse gases, carbon emissions, and the provision of concessional finance to save lives and livelihoods in countries on the front line of the devastating impact of pandemics and natural hazards brought on by climate change. How can we make a difference? Using avenues such as the Berlin Economic Forum to highlight the challenging and changing global political economy and its impact on SIDS is a starting point. Calling for the implementation of the fulfillment of commitments made by developed countries as outlined in the Paris Agreement and within the context of the United Nations Framework Convention on Climate Change makes a huge difference between the world we know now and the world our children will inherit. On the issue of trade, the global ecosystem as we know it, and economists will tell you that free trade is the best thing for our global economy. We ignore the fact that even within economic partnership agreements, including the EU ACP countries' EPA agreement, there's an uneven balance of trade. And my thesis on this matter is that we must take into account fair trade and the uneven balance of trade within the context of what we call free trade. We can truly make a difference for the better, for all, if we are genuinely committed to act in accord with the fundamental precepts of international law and in pursuance of the requisite of peace, prosperity, sustainable development, and security. As I conclude, I want to make this very telling point. And I genuinely hope my contribution here today has brought a thought-provoking thesis, and if I have offended the status quo, then I have met my objective. Because it is for us to cause us to pause and to think that even within the global political economy and how we navigate the very modern challenges as we see it, the establishment clearly needs a global reset. International institutions, both financial institutions and geopolitical organizations, clearly needs a reset. And forums such as this economic forum are integral in charting the way forward for us to navigate the future of our global political economy. I want to thank you, and I hope that the remaining sessions of today's discussion are as fruitful as we have begun. Thank you very much.